Good morning. We'll start the Lobster Board meeting in 2 minutes. Good morning. Welcome to the American Lobster Board meeting this morning. My name is Dan McKiernan from the state of Massachusetts, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. First on the agenda is the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Terry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to add a short discussion on Gulf of Maine cod bycatch and traps under other business.
Thank you, Terry. Anyone else? Seeing none. Next, we have the approval of the minutes of the 2014 August meeting. Are there any comments on those proceedings? Seeing none, I'll assume they're accepted. Public comment. Is there anyone here in the room, in the audience, who would like to speak on any of the items that are not on the agenda this morning? I see one hand at the back of the room. Sir, come forward. Come forward to the microphone. Would you like to speak, sir? Give your name, please.
Roger Freight. I'm president of West End of Long Island Lobster Association in Connecticut. I've been fishing over 50 years, running 3 boats with my son. Started the first lobster association, first logbook in 1974. Started out of Dairy and Seafood, the Venage program. Also declared the sound of disaster along with Terry Backer, Doc Gunther, Lance Stewart, and Congressman Shays. We got the $13 million, 6 for research. I just want to talk about what's happening in the Sound. By logbook, me and my son were the biggest fishermen in the Sound. Our problems all started in 1999 when the West Nile started. The industry was a $100 million industry just in Connecticut. There's approximately 1,150 fishermen. Hurricane Floyd started the problems in 1999. September 17th, the EPA loaded 155,000 storm drains with pesticides. Our logbook showed 90 to 100% down after that. Working with Doc Gunther, Lance Stewart, Attorney General Blumenthal, there's about 20 names I can give you, right up to the governor, right up with the feds. Going back and forth, Wesley, Rhode Island, I used to buy from Champion Seafood, 2000. Same thing happened to them. Lobsters ran offshore. They didn't die so much like they died down our way. Newport, same thing there. Okay, trying to find out what the problem was. Doc Gunther trying to get everyone to use the bacteria. Sylvan de Geese and Dr. French from UConn proved that the immune systems were blown apart with all the pesticides the EPA put in. 2004, there's a symposium, $125 million suit we had. Sylvan de Geese was forced to use New York's results and drop all the chemicals and pesticides they found in the lobsters, which blew their immune system apart. Lobsters are an arthropod, same mosquito family. Our state, along with Doc Gunther and Attorney General Blumenthal, mainly Lance Stewart, and an awful lot of other people, we more or less outlawed the pesticides, and we're using the BTI. Al Getman is the head of mosquito control in Rhode Island. He did the same thing. He only used methoprene in the beginning. Now he's using BTI 4-star or Viaxo down, which is all BTI. The 15-year rebuilding plan, which I had said from the beginning was going to be the ruination of the lobster industry. Now, as I go back to Rhode Island, every year 2-3 boats are sold. They can't make a living with 800 traps. Gauge is 3 3/8. It's going to be 3.5. They're running offshore when the shells, when it's not even warm out. Catch quota, season closure, like our state has a season closure. There's about maybe 15 lobstermen in the whole state now out of 1,150. There's no reason to have a season closure. During this time, we got a bill passed. 2013, July 21st, they passed the bill 6441, outlawing methoprene and resmethrin. That was the biggest thing. Doc Gunther tried to get that done for the last 4 years. Now, he passed away 2 years ago, but I'm sure everyone knows him here and how he loved this organization. I'm sure he's sitting right with us. We worked everything out of Dairy and Seafood. We talked to every state up and down from Groton to New York on this side and from Montauk to New York City trying to change the BTI. Suffolk County, there's a man there, Dominic Nanwinji, which Lieutenant Bakey read a suit overspraying, $4 million a year, spraying out the helicopters, loading all the storm drains with methoprene, scourge, anvil. So last year, I got a meeting there with this gentleman named Snyderman. He's a legislator who's running the health department, who's trying to stop his own man from spraying. So,
Sir,
yes.
are you going to ask this board to address spraying issues, or
Well,
where are you going with this?
I'm going with what's going to the whole lobster industry, from the ocean to the sound, which happened to our industry. I just want to talk about how we are straightening Long Island Sound out. I'm going to tell you the guys that passed this bill. Senator Duff, Senator Backer, Senator Greg Minor, Senator Leone, Senator Steinberg, Senator Lisa Wright, and the Governor McCloy signed it. Meeting was 2000...
Sir, if you don't mind, I appreciate your concerns. I have a feeling that you want to go on and you want to bring a lot of information forward on this. Can I ask you to submit it to us in writing, and we'll try to address it at the next meeting? Or can I move you to other business toward the end? We have a ton of business to accomplish, and I just don't know what particular action or input you want from the board, or do you just want to recount history here?
Our state came down to my store January 19th, Bill Hyatt, Dave Simpson couldn't make it, and Colleen. Okay, they did the research. I just want to talk about this. The research of $90,000 of 2012 and 2013. Sane Yukon found method brain arrhythmia. Bridgeport Agricultural School with the most modern technology found nothing. Michigan State University lobsters thawed out. When I brought this over to Long Island, it blew the whole Long Island take in our bill, which we try to get to adapt to Doc Gunther and the Attorney General Blumenthal. Now, when I called Bridgeport Agricultural School, talked to the main girl, Holly Turner, says they never did any research up there on these pesticides. I just want to know where we're going with this. We've been working so hard, our west end of Long Island Sound. We got a bill passed, and all these laws, this 15-year rebuilding plan, are really to protect research. That's what's becoming this. Millions of dollars of research and laws made up so fishermen can't fish. I like you people to look at this and see what you're doing from the sound to the ocean. Thank you very much.
Strong points. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. All right, anyone else from the public? Seeing none. All right, thank you. Next on the agenda is review of the Cancer Crab Public Information Document. Kate Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am going to very briefly go through the public information documents and talk about the public comment that was received. So just for background, the board did initiate the development of an FMP based on the recommendations from the Jonah Crab Fisheries Improvement Project, which seeks to improve the cancer crab performance to a level that's consistent with MSC certification. Specifically, the FIP recommended to the Commission to address the fact that crabs are currently unregulated in federal waters, that landings and effort are increasing rapidly. There are currently no minimum size regulations to protect spawning biomass. The expanding fishery may threaten the effectiveness of lobster conservation measures, and the long-term sustainability may be compromised. Current management in state waters for the commercial fishery is variable between jurisdictions. There's no maximum landing size restrictions. All states do require some reporting, and some states require licensing. There's variable recreational management between the jurisdiction as well. And as I mentioned, in federal waters, all harvest is unregulated. There's a table that's contained in the PID that explains the regulations by state. The current status of the stocks for both cancer crab species, this is Jonah crab and rock crab, are unknown. There's no range-wide stock assessment for either species. States currently do some assessment surveys for the species, but they do vary by states, and there is information collected through NODA Fisheries that our technical committee is working to analyze this information. Since 2002, the cancer crab fishery has increased from about 2 million pounds to almost 9 million pounds in recent years. The public comment, public information document contains mainly 7 sections looking for asking specific questions of the public to gain information. The first issue is coordinated coastwide management needed, and should this be through the commission? These are kind of all the general questions that were asked, so I'm not going into this in great depth. The second issue dealt with what should the management objectives be. The third issue asked if the commission should require a minimum size for Jonah and rock crab, and should there be a possession tolerance. And also, should there be a prohibition on commercially harvested female crab or a prohibition on the possession of egg-bearing females, and also how should the recreational fishery be managed. Issue 4 asked if the FMP should require a license for commercial harvest, and should it be linked to the lobster fishery. Currently, licensed lobstermen harvest about 98.3% of the Jonah crab landed from federal waters, and Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire already tie Jonah crab harvest to their lobster licenses. The PID also addresses monitoring, specifically what level of monitoring is needed and what should be required. The FIP, moving on to issue 6, the FIP requested the commission consider implementing an interim measure prohibiting the possession of female Jonah crab until the FMP comes into effect. And so the PID asked if emergency or interim measures should be implemented. And lastly, the PID asked what recommendations should be made to federal waters. Are there any questions on the PID? Seeing none. The public comment period ran from August 20th to October 3rd. During this time, comments were submitted by 11 individuals and 5 organizations. There were public hearings held in 5 states, with about 80% of the attendance at the Maine and Rhode Island hearings. On written comments that were received, now this is for both individual and organizational comments. They were very similar, so I combined them. It was the general consensus that the commission should manage the 2 fisheries, possibly separately, and that the commission needs to take into account the biological differences and regional differences, if there are any. Under the management objectives, there was comments that there's a need to maintain a healthy and sustainable fishery that optimizes economic return while protecting the participants who have been historically engaged in the fishery. Moving on to issue 3, management measures, there was support for the protective measures for females, including a tolerance for any measures. There was support for different size regulations for Jonah and rock crab, and you can see the numbers up on the screen, and also the support for a tolerance, and comments were received that we need to consult the TC, AP, and LEC in determining the size regulations that are appropriate. There was also some support for bag limit and size limits in the recreational fishery. Of course, that size limit should be consistent in the recreational fishery with the commercial fishery. For issue 4, there was support for linking the crab permits to the lobster permit, that participants in the fishery should be limited to those with authorized trap tags for the lobster fishery, and the possibility that the landings fishery should be taken into account when determining license qualification. Many comments supported mandatory data collection, and also that biological information is needed prior to management decision determination, and that industry should be included in any monitoring program. There was mixed support for taking emergency action at this time, but there was support for consistent regulations between federal and state waters. Other general recommendations that were received is that the commission needs to set a control date, that no regulations are needed for the fishery right now. There was expressed concern about the tremendous influx of participants into the fishery, that there is a socioeconomic importance of the fishery, especially in the wintertime. And this was stressed a lot, that there is need for clear universal names. There's a lot of regional name differences, and this could cause confusion in landings and landings history. And recommendations to use a shell height restriction or escape vents in management action. Moving into the public hearings, some of these were similar comments. Again, that there is need for consistent coastwide management through the commission, and to possibly manage the species separately. The management objectives should achieve the maximum economic yield, although the long-term sustainability of any cancer crab management program will be difficult given the variability and the cyclical nature of the fishery. Issue 3 recommends that there's support for 4.5 to 5 inch minimum size. Many comments were received that fishermen already currently throw back females, so there's no need for regulations to protect the females. And also there were comments received that at the right minimum size, there's no need for female-specific regulations. A few comments were received that gauging each crab would take a lot of time in this high-volume fishery, and there was mixed support for a tolerance. There was mostly unanimous support for linking the crab permits to a lobster permit with an authorized trap tag, but a few comments did say that there might be a possible way to grandfather in people without a lobster permit that currently do fish for cancer crab. In general, the data collection comments focus that we need more information before management, and if any data collection program is developed, there should be industry involvement. On issue 6, emergency action, there was some support, but comments did say that it might be hard to pass an emergency measure given the standard set by NOAA Fisheries, and also in light of the fact that there is not a lot of data, so it's hard to prove that there is an emergency exists. But in general, there were comments that interim actions could include linking the harvest with lobster permits and possibly start at a 4.5 minimum size restriction. And there was general support for consistency between federal and state waters regulations. Other recommendations that did come up for inclusion, if the board goes forward with the development of an FMP, is we will need to address crab parts. Also, the consideration of molt phase or hardness in regulations, as the processors want hard crabs. Also, that the Commission should issue a statement that management is in progress to make sure that buyers know that this is a sustainable fishery. And again, the use of escape panels, and also the Commission needs to consider the socioeconomic importance of this fishery. So actually we're currently at the step review of the PID, and moving forward, there would be potential for a review of the management document in February or possibly in May if the board does go forward with this, with review possibly at the end of 2015. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Kate? Adam?
Thank you. I was wondering, Kate, if there was any comment during the public hearing. I saw the comments about expressing interest in protecting some of those people who have been in the industry, that it was a fishery that was growing. Was there discussion about why it was growing with regards to, is it primarily displaced lobstermen? I mean, this board and the service has taken significant actions in recent years. We heard comment at the beginning from the public here today about certain human-induced factors that are affecting it. And is this primarily displaced lobstermen at this point? And are we going down a road of having to manage another species as a function of management actions we felt we've needed to take in the past? Or are they just discovering that they could sell these crabs now?
Thanks. I'll take that question for Kate. I think it's a combination of factors, and I think there's several industry members in the room who could correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll take a stab at it. With the decline in the southern New England lobster catch, there certainly has been a shift to other species. We see it on channeled whelk in state waters, and in federal waters, the shift has been primarily to Jonah crab fishing. At the same time, I think markets have expanded for those, and the processing capacity has increased pretty dramatically in recent years. So a combination of those factors have caused a large shift in effort in offshore federal waters south of New England. I think is where the primary increases in Jonah crab landings have occurred. So yes, I think it's a combination of market factors along with displaced fishermen in the lobster fishery looking for ways to increase their income.
Thank you, Bob. Any other, David Borden, questions?
Yeah, just to follow up on Bob's point, I think everybody should keep in mind that the shift by the industry into crabs is to the benefit of the lobster industry. But from what we can tell, about 99% of the people are lobster fishermen. So the fact that they're directing on crabs actually is taking some of the pressure off the lobster industry in southern New England. And Mr. Chairman, while I've got the mic, I'd just like to say that I intend to recuse myself from any voting on crab issues. I think, as everybody knows, I'm the executive director of Atlantic Offshore, and we have in the conflict policy, we've got this requirement where if you have more than 10% interest, you should recuse yourself. I don't know whether our members have land more than 10%, because I don't have the confidential information to make that judgment, but just as out of an abundance of caution, I talked to Bob, and I think the best thing to do is just recuse myself. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any other comments or questions? Tom O'Connell?
Yeah, Kit, I apologize if I missed it. My understanding is some of the Maryland fishermen brought up the issue of a crab-only fishery, and would that be explored in this FMP if it goes forward? Understanding would have to be evaluated as whether or not it would be sustainable and enforceable.
Do you mean a crab license that's not linked to a lobster license?
I'm sorry, it's a claw-only fishery? I'm sorry.
Yes, the issue of addressing crab parts versus whole crabs has been brought up, and so that is one of the items that we can address in the development of an FMP if the board does choose to go forward with that.
Steve Train?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That may have answered my question. I noticed in the comments there was a comment that said crabs shouldn't be sold whole, which kind of shocked me, because if we only land parts, there's no sense in putting a size limit in.
Fair point. All right. Is there any comment from the audience or questions from the audience? Where's David? Yes, David.
David Spencer, offshore lobsterman, Newport, Rhode Island. I just wanted to, I agree with everything Bob Glenn said in responding to the question. I just had one addition. It's obvious to most fishermen that the crab resource is exploding as well. The spatial distribution and volume is pretty much unprecedented. So I think that's an important consideration into the answering of your question. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Sir in the back.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Tebow, President, Red Tail Fisheries, lifetime fisherman. I do agree also with Bob Glenn and his statement where lobstermen diversifying into the crab fishery. It's always been a bycatch for our fishery, and it has become more prevalent. The marketing has increased. I think we're sitting here today discussing if the commission is going to decide to take some management on the crabs. It got brought to a highlight, it seemed like, basically because of economics. Some of the buyers and processors of the crabs are deeming them that we need a sustainability clause attached to them. It's really not a biologically driven crab plan. I know the FIP put out for that public information document. When we had public hearings on it, I might have misconstrued how that process worked. It seemed like when I read the minutes from the meeting that there was votes given. I saw Kate had put up, 11 people had spoke on it, but I guess I know the public information part of it is closed now. But I mean, I would have voted at that time to support a 4.5-inch crab, not potentially the 5-inch crab that's brought forward, and the need for tolerance. If this commission does accept to make a recommendation for an FMP, tolerance needs to be included in that dramatically. It's a fishery that a lot of us are in. It's a volume fishery. The tolerance will help the onboard processing of the crab. We fish very economically on the crab. We know what the market is for them already. I've done a tremendous amount of sampling on crabs. I've done 1,200 samples on board myself. The largest female crab I've touched is 123 millimeters. So with a 4.5-inch carapace width, we would be protecting 98% of the females, according to my studies that have been done so far. There's not a lot of...
If I could cut you off, because those are issues that were going to be brought up as potential items for the draft addendum, so I don't think you need to lobby on that issue just yet, but I appreciate your feedback. Are there any particular questions that you want for Bob or for Kate at this time? Because I think whatever you're going to be giving us, we're going to be getting into next. I think you're jumping the gun.
Okay, yep, I apologize if I, have jumped the gun in the process. Again, lifetime fisherman, I feel invested. I've taken the time out of the day to come and speak, and, I'm sure there are commissioners here that are not aware of the whole process. We're not a greedy bunch of fishermen trying to catch the last crab in the fishery. We have supported the process going forward if the commission decides to accept it. Please hear the fishermen out. It's an important part of our fishery. Without a tolerance attached to the plan, I know it will be discussed later, I can't express enough importance of that on the rail of my boat. I thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none. There was a memo that I drafted for the board dated October 21st, and it sets out what I described here as a decision pathway. So the first thing we have to do is decide whether to move forward with management and the development of an FMP, and then once we've done that, we need to decide how do we want to populate the usual other committees, specifically the plan development team, the technical committee, and an advisory panel. So I think at this time it would be useful if we could get a motion to decide whether or not to continue on the path of a fishery management plan for cancer crabs. Steve Train.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to make that motion. I may need some help with the wording with staff, but I believe it would be in our best interest to create a PDT with the development of an FMP, but I believe it should be for Jonah crab exclusively. I think we need to eliminate the combination of the other crabs.
Steve, at this time, I think it's a simpler request. Do we want to move forward with the development of a management plan or not? So you're saying yes. You move that we do that. All right. But for Jonah crab exclusively, not for rock crab.
Correct.
All right. Do I have a second on that motion? Bill Adler. Any discussion on the motion? Terry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the Portland, Maine public hearing, there's a great deal of concern and confusion on the document because of the cancer crab designation at least in the main fishery. What we call peaky toes could be rock crabs, could be sand crabs, could be grass crabs, and the difference is the focus being of the Jonah crabs, and we have some of our fishermen call Jonah crabs rock crabs. The terminology was very confusing. It took, as Kate remembers, it took a while to untangle it. So Steve's point of focusing, if the intent of the board is to focus on Jonah crabs, we should be very specific of what it is. Otherwise, a myriad of regulations on sizes, types. I think we can make it very complicated very quickly. So I would support Steve's motion.
Bill Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask Dave Borden, is there any possibility that the other crab species that we're eliminating here might also be a marketable thing, and then we have to come back and figure this out? Anybody that can answer that question for me.
David Borden, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Bill's question, there's already a market for the rock crabs now, but the primary market now is for Jonah crabs. So I think that on Steve's motion, And I think this is a very good idea. You may want to include Terry's suggestion, Steve, in this. The motion would basically say that move to develop an FMP with an initial focus on Jonah crabs, and that would preserve the option for the commission to subsequently look at other species later on, but that's up to you. Thank you.
Terry?
Just as a follow-up to David's suggested perfection, most of the other crabs are state water crabs only, at least in Maine, and we haven't even talked about collaborating with the feds or the council. So I would be comfortable with a federal waters fishery of the Jonah crabs only.
Bill Adler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we proceed with an FMP on the Jonah crab, and all of a sudden we decide that the other crab, and I agree with Terry with, the confusion here, rock crab, whatever, that do we have to do a complete different FMP or an additional amendment just like this for the other crab then? Is that what would have to do?
That would depend on where in the process you want to add it. Likely, if a PDT and AP is developed, we would bring a draft back to the board for February, and at that time, the board could, based on the language in that draft, could decide if they wanted to include another crab species. If it was after an FMP was approved, then we would have to go through an additional process.
Any other comments? Yes, Tom Foti.
Yeah, Mike, I'm just curious. If the other fisheries are state crabs, state fisheries only, do those crabs migrate from one state to another? I know it used to be a long policy that we really didn't do the crabs because, again, it wasn't. We used to use the Wallop Road money when the commission first did it, and since they didn't basically handle crabs, we couldn't do crabs way back when. And when we started doing crabs now, but also we didn't do crabs because we were looking at blue claws, and they basically didn't migrate from one state, so it was up to the state to control their crabs. Are the other crabs migrating from one state to the other, or are they for their own state? So we shouldn't really have, Jonas is out in the EEZ, so I guess it would be different.
Yeah, maybe Bob Glenn can respond to that question.
I'm sure there's some minimal cross-boundary movements among adjacent states for Jonah and rock crabs. I don't think we know a lot about whether their migratory habits, though, since there's not really any large-scale tagging studies that I'm aware. What does strike me, though, with both Jonah and rock crab fisheries, at least in my experience with Mass and Rhode Island, that there's certain lot of opportunities for interstate commerce of the two species. So you may want to consider those types of issues relative to using and having an FMP.
Dave Simpson?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is the right way to go, to focus on Jonas. That's what originally came up. I do just want to ask, though, if there's a value in including the rock crab because of the gear that's used and potential problems with managing trap limits for lobster. If there's also a rock crab trap out there that looks very similar, are there concerns around the table about that?
Anyone? Well, personally, I could speak to that as we deal with the large whale take reduction plan with the National Marine Fisheries Service. It is an issue that we address. As managers, we're often touting the strict effort controls that we've accomplished in the lobster fishery, and it's a difficult sell if folks who are listening to us realize that there's a potential or a real proliferation of other gears that are largely unregulated. Peter Burns, did you have your hand up earlier?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I could see that, we're working on looking at a Jonah crab, development of a Jonah crab plan, and from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it's mostly a federal waters fishery and prosecuted by federal waters, federal lobster permit holders. So as we move forward here, I just recommend that the Commission work with the Council, the New England Fishery Management Council, as needed to engage with them as the development of this management plan moves forward.
Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to make sure we don't have any further confusion, can we use the scientific names for these, especially for what you refer to as being referred to as rock crab, because especially in eastern Maine, that's not what we call them, and that led to a lot of the confusion that Terry referred to earlier about the public hearing.
Certainly. I think one of the solutions was to refer to the genus as the cancer crabs as the pair, but at this point it looks like we're leaving rock crabs behind. All right. Any comments from the audience? I guess we can take a vote on this motion. Any questions or comments from the audience? No, seeing none. All right, can we take a vote on this particular motion, Kate? Yep. No. Do we need to caucus? No. All right. Yep. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? Abstentions? No votes. All right, passes unanimously. All right, next up is our task with staff's assistance to decide on the creation of a plan development team, a technical committee, and an advisory panel. Do I have can I get a motion, or does Kate, would you like to discuss some of the advantages of the options? We have two options. One would be to assign the FMP to the incumbent lobster PDT, or to create a separate, now Jonah crab PDT.
Just in general, for the creation of separate lobster and cancer crab committees. For example, our lobster technical committee is working very hardly on the lobster stock assessment right now, so it would be very difficult to assign tasks to the lobster technical committee to review any development of FMP. Additionally, the AP for lobster is mostly inactive at this time, and there was significant public comment that was received that an AP should be developed and be involved with the development of any FMP. Additionally, we need to have states that are interested in the fishery need to make sure that they email Tony to declare their interest in the fishery. We can work offline to populate these committees, but it will be helpful to have direction from the board whether they would like to move forward with either tasking the current committees as they stand under the Lobster Board, the Technical Committee, Advisory Panel, and PDT, or create new committees specific to cancer crab. Thank you.
Bill Adler?
My question to Kate, if you try to form a different PDT or technical committee or advisory panel, are we talking about the same person or the same people are going to end up on this one that are on the other one? I mean, are we going to have a completely different new slate of people on the PDT technical committee, or just going to be the same people, isn't it?
That would depend on whom the state moves forward with recommending. It is our hope that, given the workload of the lobster TC, that hopefully those people would be different. Also for the PDT, also we would hope that the members do not include necessarily the technical committee person, but do contain some higher level management officials, since this will be a policy development document.
I had Terry, and then I'll go to Richie.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's unrealistic to expect states, even state of Maine, who's got an extremely valuable and important lobster fishery, to dual staff PDTs. We don't have the manpower. I mean, our lobster biologist and his crew, when they did the crab project, were the very same people. So I would be supportive of having a PDT that was for the same PDT for both lobsters and crabs. And I do think we probably need to take a look at the AP and expand it to include different representation from the LCMTs, because this crosses many boundaries.
I'm going to recognize Tony.
Just to clarify, plan development teams are disassembled once a document is finished and completed. So we currently do not have a PDT for the lobster board. So we would need to populate a PDT to craft this FMP. For the other committees, yes, we do have current committees for lobster, and you could decide whether or not you want to have new members or not for that.
Richie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there ought to be a separate advisory panel. I mean, clearly, the existing advisory panel would have members that aren't fishing for crab, and I think that ought to be made up of people that are clearly targeting crab as well. So I think that should be a separate advisory panel.
Thank you, Richie. Doug Grout?
Yeah, I concur with Richie that the AP needs to be a separate panel, whether the TC or PTT are separate, doesn't make any difference to me. I'm going to put the same persons on it no matter what. So you can either call it separate or the same.
Okay. I'm going to go to David Borden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as the AP, I support the concept of having a separate AP. You know, if you look at the LCMTs, there are a large number of individuals that basically are not participating in crabs, and I think it would benefit the crab discussion to have people that are focused on that fishery. As far as the PETs and the TCs, that we're talking about it like it's mutually exclusive, and I don't view it that way. In other words, to Terry's point, he's got an individual who's really focused on lobsters, and if he wants that same individual on a separate PDT and a separate TC to serve in both capacities, I see nothing wrong with that. That when this came up in the FIP process, the point was made that there are individuals who actually specialize in crabs, and maybe we should include some of those. So, you know, I think if we leave it flexible so the states can appoint either new people or the same people and just let the states do the designation, we don't have to argue about the point. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get a motion on the floor to accomplish that? Bill Adler?
All right, I'll try. And make a motion to establish a PDT for this crab FMP and a technical committee and a separate advisory panel for this development of a plan. Is that what you want?
Yeah, it sounds like you're favoring separate committees in all three cases, but it's up to the state how they want to populate them. In other words, it's our discretion whether to submit the names of the same people who serve on the lobster groups or not. But they would have, it's a distinct committee in all three cases.
Okay, but the advisory panel would be a different one.
Yes, this allows those folks who specialize or focus on crab harvest to participate, and it might leave certain industry members off that don't participate in the crab fishery. So,
is that right, Mr. Chairman? Is that what you wanted?
Bill, are you good with that? Does that capture your sentiments?
Yes, and as long as it's open that you could develop a separate, okay, I've got that, yeah.
All right, thank you. Do I get a second? Terry, thank you. So, do you also want to comment?
As long as I can ask a question.
Sure, go ahead.
The question probably to Tony, and that would be to ensure that we have a federal representation on the PDT.
Yes, we've already discussed that with NOAA.
All right. Any other discussion on this motion? Yes, Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if you'd permit a comment from someone who lives in a state that doesn't participate in this fishery, to my knowledge, and that is, I think we've missed an opportunity here by just making this specific to Jonah crab. Are we going to go down the same road of forming a PDT and an FMP should the market for rock crab expand? I like David Borden's original suggestion to kind of link the two. I think there's a real economy of human resources and time of this commission to lump these two species together, since apparently they're fish bore with the same gear. At least that's my understanding. I just wanted to make that comment now before it's too late, before we move down this path exclusively for Jonah crab and then have to revisit it, the whole process again. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. David Spencer, your hand was up. Yeah, I'll go back down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking specifically to the AP, just for the economy of meeting attendance, I would like to throw out another option, just expand the lobster AP and have each state either appoint somebody that, one or two people that are in the crab fishery. It's difficult enough with a number of meetings, and if the board does later on in this meeting start to link the harvest of Jonah crab with a lobster license, you're going to have all the lobster AP people wanting to attend the crab AP meeting anyway. So it just seems it makes more sense to me just to expand the lobster AP. Thank you.
David, I think we could certainly nominate most, if not all, of the current AP members to the crab AP as well. Maybe that would suffice. Bill Adler?
To Roy's comment, Kate, didn't you say that we could include, when the draft comes back from the PDT, technical, whoever, that we could include the other crab into this so that we wouldn't have to go through a complete new FMP for the other crab? Didn't you say we could include it at that time or something like that?
Yes, it's likely that the draft will come back for board review in February, potentially not for public comment at that time, but just for board review. So the board could have an opportunity to review it at that time, and if they chose to include rock crab at that time, they could, or down the line, it could also be included through the addendum process.
With Steve. Steve, are you comfortable with that? That if the draft management plan comes back with some mentions of rock crabs, that it could be incorporated, it could go out to hearing and eventually be incorporated?
It doesn't sit well right now, but it makes sense as far as if we have to ever do this again. But I don't think we're going to work it forward in this plan. It's something that means 4 or 5 years down the road we can incorporate it, correct? Or 10 years down the road, is that what she means? Or does that mean it could start when it comes back in 4 months?
Well, I think the plan itself would have to establish on page 1 that it's cancer crabs, both species, and whether there's management provisions in the document or not is up to us. But the scope of this plan covering one or both species, I think, would need to be established at the outset. And I've got a few hands up. Beal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's a couple ways to proceed. One would be essentially what Kate said, which is, the plan development team will bring a draft back to this board, and once they see the draft, if they feel they want to add in rock crab, they can do it at that point, and then the plan development team will add that and bring the document back for approval at the subsequent meeting, and then it will go out for public hearings. The other way to do it would be under the adaptive management section, have a list of other crab species that may be added at a later date, and that can be done through adaptive management, essentially through an addendum, rather than starting a whole new FMP. So those are two options for moving forward. Or, a third option is include it today and ask the plan development team to include it from the outset.
Back to Steve.
That second option sounds much better, Mr. Chair. If we just tie in what we call sand crab, what's being referred to as rock here today, with the Jonah plan, we wouldn't have a rock crab fishery because we struggle to get them over 5 inches.
Okay. Yes, David Simpson.
Yeah, I think the way this discussion is going makes me more comfortable because I think the one connection we might find we need to rock crabs once the PDT starts working on this is trap allocations and the overlap. And if it becomes apparent to the PDT that we need to be clear what kind of gears can be used that are capable of taking lobsters, Jonahs, and rock crabs, we may find we need to add them for that purpose. But I don't envision getting into size management and all of that with rocks.
Okay. Terry.
To David's point, if we're contemplating adding new fisheries, one of the upcoming agenda items refers to the take reduction plan. And adding more vertical lines in the water at this point gives me great angst.
Doug Grout.
Yeah, to Steve's comment, I would perceive that if perchance we were going to add rock crab in, that we would probably have different size limits in the plan. It wouldn't just be a 5-inch all cancer crabs. If the species are different and they're sexually mature at a different size, then we clearly could have that as a separate item. So I agree with some of the options. I think we should have the PDT develop a plan, come back and decide whether we're going to just have it as adaptive management or include the rock crabs in right away. Or
Okay. All right, so leaving this meeting today, it's understood that the PDT is going to develop a plan that could include mention of rock crab, but not necessarily management at the same level or in the same specifications. Terry Stockwell?
To that point, then, we're going to have to rethink the first motion.
I think so.
And I would be opposed.
Would you like to make one?
No, I'm comfortable where we're at right now.
Okay. Does anyone want to reconsider the first motion? All right, well, maybe we make that motion in the February meeting after we see what product the PDT comes up with. All right, thank you. Bill Adler?
I don't have a problem with the first motion, because if we took what Bill had said, under adaptive management, we could list other things that might be approached later, and we could just develop it on the Jonah crab. But if we list, as Bob said, in the adaptive management process, other crabs, that leaves the door open later if we have to do it. If I listened to Bob correctly, was that correct?
Okay, I guess we can take a vote on the motion that's on the board. The motion is to establish a PDT, TC, and AP for the Jonah crab fishery management plan. Motion by Mr. Adler, second by Mrs. Stockwell. Do we need to caucus? Probably not. All right, all in favor? Opposed? No. Abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, next on the agenda is review of consistency with state and federal regulations. Kate, do you have anything, or is that mine? Okay. Yes, David.
Mr. Chairman, the end of your memo has 11 items on it. Did you want to have discussion of that?
Yeah, that's true, David, thank you. At the tail end of the, returning to the memo on the Jonah crab fishery, I listed 10 items that, based on my read of the comments, seem to represent strong, or if not consensus, positions, things that the PDT could include into a management plan. And those 10 items are listed. Shall I read them briefly? Management should be coordinated through the Commission. Consistent coastwide management through the Commission with recommended complementary rules in federal waters. Management objectives include conservation, sustainability, enhancement of economic return, minimum sizes in the range of 4 to 5 inch carapace width for one or both species. To facilitate compliance and effective law enforcement, tolerance for incidental noncompliance should be considered. Directed trap fishery to be limited to only those who hold a state or federal lobster permit, and any trap set for the capture of cancer crabs shall bear an official lobster trap tag. Distinguish directed fishery from non-directed fishery with possible trip limits on the non-directed fishery. Recreational license not needed but subject to state preferences. Require mandatory fishery-dependent data collection based on, at a minimum, the standards established for lobster management. Require fishery-independent data collection by states that have a declared interest. Encourage further life history investigations. Consider regulations pertaining to possession of crab parts and specify gear characteristics such as trap size, escape vents, and ghost panels. Is there anything that's on this list that any of the board members feel should not be, or is there any other points that should be added as guidance to the PDT? Doug Grout.
One thing that gives me a little bit of cause for concern is required fisheries independent data collection by states, considering that the majority of this fishery is taking, the Jonah crab fishery is taking place in federal waters. Requiring states to have fisheries independent surveys for that species, I'm a little bit, what are we going to get out of it? I think it should be, clearly it's something that needs to be handled in federal fisheries because that's where they occur. And I can understand the fisheries dependent because it's being landed in the state. But
okay. Dennis, do you have your hand up? No. Peter Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you did a good job capturing the real major elements of what the plan should include, given what we heard at the public hearings and in the public comments. And I just want to point out one of the tenets was that you had to have either a state or a federal lobster permit to go forward in the crab fishery. And so I just wanted to get a clarification that that is something that I think the PDT could probably work through. Certainly I heard Terry's concerns about the nervousness about putting more gear into the water, but we do know that even though there's about 98% of the crabs are in federal waters are harvested by lobstermen already, or somebody with a federal lobster permit or some kind of lobster permit, there is that group of people out there that don't have a permit that do have some crab history. So I just want to throw that out there and make sure that that's something that the PDT could at least consider in the development of the plan.
Thank you, Peter. Yes. Emerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to Peter's comment as well, in New York we have a separate crab permit. And there are some participants in the Jonah crab fishery who have a crab permit but not a lobster permit. So that needs to be included, or at least discussion about that needs to be included as well.
Thank you. All right. So I guess based on those comments, we'll move forward with those 10 items on the list to the PDT. Next on the agenda is a review of consistency between state and federal regulations with potential action, and Kate has a few slides on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the first issue, the recommendations on the trap transfer regulations, there was a subcommittee that met in early September to discuss consistency between federal and commission regulations, specifically the conservation tax, trap transfer increments, and the dual permit transfers. And this issue was also previously brought up at the August meeting, where the board tasked the subcommittee to meet and develop recommendations for the full board. On the issue of the conservation tax, the current federal rule only applies the 10% transfer tax to partial allocation transfers. Under the Commission's plan, both the partial and full business transfers are subject to this 10% tax. The recommendation of the subcommittee is the development of an addendum to remove the 10% transfer tax on full transfers and requests annual review by the TC of transfer rates and rates of trap attrition in the affected areas. With regard to the trap transfer increments, the issue is that the current federal rule only allows trap transfers to be processed in 10 trap increments. The Commission's plan does not include language on what this increment should be, but does specify that it will set it at some point. The recommendation of the subcommittee, again, is to develop an addendum, possibly in conjunction with the first motion, to require that traps be transferred in 10 trap increments in all areas with trap transferability. And the last issue deals with dual permit transfers. Under the current federal rule, a dual permit holder may purchase a federal trap allocation from any other dual permit holder, regardless of the state. And under the Commission's plan, that dual permit holder is restricted to transferring traps only to other dual permit holders from within the same state. There was considerable discussion on this issue, but overall there was support for the federal regulation. And the TC should be tasked to document transfer rates and trap attrition and report annually to the board. If the consolidation patterns are problematic, corrective action could be taken at a subsequent meeting. But given the preference for consistency, there was support for the federal rule and moving with that direction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions for Kate? None. So, Kate, I guess we would need a motion to take those three items forward to accept the working group recommendations. Can I get a motion to accept the working group recommendations? Steve Train?
I'll make that motion.
To accept the working group recommendations and develop an addendum based on those recommendations. Motion by Steve Train. Do I have a second? I've got one from Mark Gibson. Any discussion on the motion? Certainly. The motion is to accept the working group recommendations and develop an addendum based on those recommendations. Motion by Mr. Train and seconded by Mr. Gibson. If no comments, any comments from the audience? Seeing none, let's take a vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Nulls? Abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda concerns review of changes to the federal large whale take reduction plan, and this is one that's that I'm personally involved with, and this is really just a heads up to the board that the Commonwealth has petitioned the National Marine Fisheries Service to amend a recently enacted 4-month closure in the area of Cape Cod Bay and Mass Bay. What we've requested the National Marine Fisheries Service to do is amend their large whale take reduction plan rules to give back, reopen the month of January, but at the same time expand the closure in area to include all of the Outer Cape Lobster Conservation Management Area. NMFS is very busily working on this at this time, and we are hopeful that they will get that amended rule in place in time for the January 1st expected closure date, so that the fishermen in Mass Bay and Cape Cod Bay could continue to fish in January. Should that happen, we're going to need an addendum to amend what is currently in Addendum 13, which is the 2-month out of Cape Cod closure. So we'll come back to the board at that time. The next issue has to do with vertical line marking rules and the consistency between jurisdictions for the state and the federal governments. Specifically, this was brought up to our attention by the New England Council about a year and a half ago. I think it arose from the Law Enforcement Committee, where mobile gear fishermen who were fishing, I believe, in the Gulf of Maine, were having some challenges seeing the gear, locating the gear, deciphering the marking scheme of the gear, and they came to the commission, and I was involved with a conference call to discuss this. We had 2 meetings, one at the Mass Lobstermen's Association, another at the Maine Fishermen's Forum, and we've had some good dialogue about this, but we decided it would be best to await the outcome of the federal large whale take reduction plan because we knew that those regulations could be substantial. So now that those rules have been enacted, I would like to address this. I'd like this board to address this with NIMS to see if it's possible to sort of inventory the existing rules that apply in states and federal waters for gear marking. And the area in question is really the 3 to 12 mile zone, because if you look at the NIMS regs currently, I believe there's kind of a gray zone in that area. Specifically, I believe the federal regulations allow or require the gear to be set according to the standards of the home state of the vessel. And that's a little bit problematic if the regulations are different between states. It's also problematic for us because the Commonwealth of Mass used to have regulations in the 3 to 12 mile zone, and we rescinded those in the flurry of some of the court cases concerning right whales and one unnamed plaintiff. So what I'd like to do is maybe ask for a committee to be established to simply review the existing rules and to see if we can maybe understand the need and for some kind of consistent rules, not necessarily make any recommendations at this time. And I think Terry's got a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your summary's pretty much spot on, even though we've disagreed about what the outcome should be. I would like to bring this issue to a closure. So I am going to make a motion to create an ad hoc subcommittee to address the inconsistent fixed gear markings in the 3 to 12 mile area beyond state waters. The subcommittee shall consist of board, LCMT, and LAC members. Keep going? Okay. The goals of the subcommittee will be to review the state and federal gear marking schemes among states and NIPS that are currently legally required in the nearshore zone, 3 to 12 miles, and to make a recommendation whether a more uniform gear marking scheme in this area would have value to alleviate gear conflicts among and within sectors and improve enforcement. And should this motion pass, I am a volunteer.
Thank you, Terry. Do I have a second on the motion? Doug Grout. Thank you, Doug. Any discussion on the motion? David Borden?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I support the intent of the motion, but in order to make this work, I think it's really critical to get the right industry people involved in it, because when you get into this issue, what you're going to find out is that there are state regulations and there are federal regulations, but there are also industry practices that may deviate from those in the absence of regulations. So it's really critical to get the industry in there, and I think they can lay that out pretty quickly. This is the way the gear is marked, and develop one set of guidelines that may be different by area to accommodate the specific industry practices in the area, but those should all be able to be written down. So somebody should be able to go to a trawl and know which end it is and that it's a lobster trawl and that type of thing. So we need a lot of industry guidance on this, I think. Thank you.
Terry.
Yeah, to David's point, one perfection to the motion would be to add to the subcommittee of representatives from the mobile gear fishery.
Thank you.
So,
Mobile gear. Any other comments? So Kate and I will work to populate this committee, and we will send around to the board our recommendations for its makeup, and we'll let you folks weigh in that way. So now we get a vote on the motion. Bill Adler?
I'll volunteer if you need me.
Great, thank you. All right, let's get a vote on the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions or nulls? Tony? Go ahead. Oh, pass unanimously. Pass unanimously. Tony Kearns.
I just want to go back to the addendum that you all approved before and just talk about timing really quick. We had, as staff had talked about, tying that addendum with the public hearings for the Jonah Crab FMP. So if we are able to get the Jonah Crab FMP or draft FMP approved in February, then we could go out and do public comment tied with the changes that are necessary to have us consistent with the federal regulations in the spring. If not, we would wait until May to do those. That's how we've put it together in the action plan. So if the board wants the timing to be any different than it being tied together with the Jonah Crab public hearings, you just need to let me know now so that when we go over the action plan this afternoon, I could suggest that change, or you as the board chair could suggest that change for the budget.
I turn to Peter Burns for a moment because I think that's the items that we discussed earlier. The timing of these are a function of when we come up with the transferability, the database, et cetera. So, Peter, do you have any thoughts on the timing of that?
Yeah, I would say that as soon as we can get parity with the plan and the federal regulations, we'll have a clearer pathway forward that can be more easily communicated to the public. So, as soon as we can get out there and develop that would be probably the best way to go.
So, Tony, we're going to be talking shortly about some of the trap allocation and transfer issues that we've been working on behind the scenes. So my guess is these things probably should not be tied to the crab FMP because I think they're more time sensitive.
So then during the action plan discussion, as the Lobster Board Chair, I would suggest that you ask that we add in additional funding to do separate hearings into the lobster budget for next year.
All right, I'll do that. Bill Adler?
Okay, I think you straightened it out because I was listening to an addendum and then I listened to the word crab. They're two separate things, right? Is that correct?
Yes, they're separate things, but we were doing them together to save money in the budget. They aren't the same document, but we would do the hearings at the same time.
Oh, the hearings. Okay, all right.
All right. So we're good on that. Our next item is update on the Southern New England 10% reduction in valuation. I think Kate has some slides on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the board may recall, under Addendum 17, all the areas within Southern New England were required to reduce exploitation by 10% in order to address rebuilding. At the August meeting, the TC presented analysis on the evaluations as they were presented to the management board, and based on this analysis, areas 4 and 5 did not meet the required reduction. Area 4 has submitted an updated proposal to meet this 10% reduction requirement, and that was included in the briefing material. The preferred option by their LCMT4 members was a 10% reduction in trap allocation. To achieve the 10% reduction in harvest, the non-preferred option was to change the close season, which is currently February-March, to April 30th through May 31st. And if new management measures for 2015 are different than the current 2014 management measures, the Area 4 mandatory V-notching of egg-bearing females will be removed from the regulation. For Area 5, they are working on a proposal potentially to have consistent regulations with Area 4. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Kate? David Borden.
Kate, I'm a little unclear. Is there action required on this or not?
Yes, the board would have to approve the updated Area 4 proposal.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, just follow up on it. Has the TC reviewed and kind of approved all of these alternatives? Bob?
Yes, the technical committee has had the opportunity to review the Area 4 plan, so I can comment specifically on those if the board's interested.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, just an observation that the thing that I find a little difficult or troubling about this is that, and Bob can correct this if I misspeak, but we're going to have a new assessment in 6 or 9 months, peer-reviewed assessment in 6 or 9 months, and we're going forward with these regulatory changes in an area that where 6 or 9 months from now we're going to get probably all new biological information. So I totally understand why we're doing this, but the timing of it is a little bit awkward. In other words, I could see us putting these regulatory changes in place, and then 9 months from now having to go back and debate whether or not the regulatory changes are adequate, and again, whether or not we should take additional steps and so forth. So it's just kind of an awkward timing. I guess it wouldn't personally wouldn't trouble me to not put any of this in place for 9 months, wait for the new stock assessment, and then address it all at once. But that's my own comment.
Let's let Bob comment on it. Do you want to give your review, TC review?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It basically, since there's no direct relationship between trap numbers and landings reduction, the TC did not feel that a 10% reduction in traps would equate to a 10% reduction in landings. Based on work was conducted in Maine by Carl Wilson looking at trapping efficiency, the estimates and the range of trap reduction before you'd start to see a change in catch rates are somewhere. In Maine, it was as high as 80% reduction. That's in a high lobster density area. In lower density areas, it's probably more like a 40 or 50% reduction that would be required before you would start to see a change in catch rates. The TC felt that option 2, a seasonal closure, would be a far better in terms of law enforcement, and that it also aligns well with the Area 6 closure, and based on the landings data, would probably have a higher likelihood of succeeding.
Thank you, Bob. So the document that's we were handed has these two options. Does the board want to take any action on one or both? Or obviously the TC has some strong opinions. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was at the LCMT4 meeting, and the lobstermen were very passionate, and it took them about 3 hours to get to developing these options. And the first 3 hours were spent basically passionately talking about, the need for better science, the need for better biological samples, and, you know, the need for the specific stock, Mid-Atlantic, or the Area 4 stock, as they put it, to be evaluated, not with Area 6. It took it took quite some work to get them on track to, you know, you guys, you need some recommendations to move forward to the TC. And obviously the trap reduction was the preferred alternative. The preferred alternative was no action. They ended up with the trap reduction, and their non-preferred was the seasonal closure for all of May and 1 day in April. And I do have a question. If there was no action here, I'm assuming it would be status quo and they would remain at their February and March closure.
That's accurate. So we have three options. One is status quo. One is, actually 4 options. We could do one of the 2 measures, or we could do both measures, leaving it up to the discretion of the state. Is there a motion to take any of these actions? Tom?
Yes, I'll throw up the LCMT Area 4's motion for the season closure of April 31 through all of May. So do you want me to read that?
Joe, do you need that read into the record? Yes. Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I believe staff has that. So I move to approve a closed season from April 29th to May 31st for LCMA 4 and 5 to achieve the required 10% reduction in Addendum 17 and allow a 2-week grace period for the removal of lobster traps and allow the setting of unbaited lobster traps 1 week prior to the season reopening. And if I could speak to that after a second.
Is there a second? Yes, Jim? Any discussion? Go ahead, Tom.
And I would like to include Area 5 in the motion. I'm sorry, I didn't speak to that earlier. Areas 4 and 5 is broken up right in the middle of New Jersey, right at Barnegat Inlet. Some of the lobstermen hold permits for both areas, and if the measures were, season closures were different, they would have to abide by all the closures. So instead of having a 1 month closure, they're likely to have a 3-month closure. Thank you.
Terry Stockwell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Tom. Has this been reviewed by the technical committee?
Yes. And we felt that out of the 2 options that this had the higher likelihood of making the 10% reduction. Out of the 4 options.
John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delaware has a very minor lobster fishery in LCMA 5. The landings did go up a little bit, but I was just looking, I mean, we're accounting for much less than 1/10% of landings. I just, echoing what David Borden said, is it really necessary for us to do anything in LCMA 5 at this time? Thank you.
Doug Grout.
Yeah, just a couple questions. First of all, Bob, when you reviewed this proposal, did it include the concept of these grace periods?
No, we didn't include the concept of the grace periods, and it would be pretty difficult for us to be able to evaluate that. It's hard to gauge, you know, in a grace period, the 2-week period afterwards, it's hard to know if those would just be traps that weren't fishing because they hadn't been rebaited in a while, or a guy's going to fish right up through. It would be a very difficult thing for us to evaluate.
But you think anything that might be lost by having these grace periods, the conservation of the 5 weeks was good enough that even if we had a little slop in it, that you'd still meet the criteria?
it would be pretty hard to determine either way. I don't think we'd have a lot of certain confidence in that determination.
And to Tom, I noticed in the document that the non-preferred option was April 30th to May 31st, and your motion says April 29th. Tom? Tom?
Yes, I'm sorry, Doug.
Just a minor thing, I noticed in the document that you produced, it said non-preferred option is closed season from April 30th to March 31st, May 31st?
Go ahead, Tom.
Yes, that is correct. That was my error. And if that could be changed, I'd appreciate it.
So you want to amend your motion to reflect April 30th? Yep. Okay, thanks. Adam, you had your hand up?
Doug got to the issue first. Thank you.
Tom, you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see. I'm sorry, I lost my... The grace periods, I believe I reviewed the motions made a couple years ago that were approved, and in those motions, those grace periods were included in those.
Steve Train, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not in favor of asking fishermen to not fish during a time period, but if we're going to put a plan in, allowing grace periods basically negates that time period, and when you set unbaited traps on shedders, they'll fish. So, the 3 weeks out of that month that the traps are in the water, those traps are fishing.
Tom O'Connell?
Thank you. I was just interested in, my understanding is that the performance of Area 5 in regards to the 10% was missed by a little over 1,000 pounds. I was looking for some verification of that. We do have only a couple fishermen in Area 5, but this closure would have a pretty significant impact to them personally.
In comparison to the reference period, the Area 5 was over by about 30,000 pounds.
Richie White?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'd be interested in what's the definition of a grace period. I mean, can those fishermen pull, bait the traps, take lobsters out during that grace period? I mean, can they actually fish, or do the traps have to stay there unattended? It seems to me that this is really a 2-week closure.
Do you want to speak to that, Tom?
Just that my understanding is that, no, they can't pull the traps during the grace period. They'd have a grace period to pull the traps for the season closure and to set them unbaited and not tend them unbaited during that 2-week time.
So, Tom, I have a question. Will individual fishermen know to bring all this gear home, or is it going to be gear simply left in the area and the bait will run out and they won't be touched? What's the operational reality of this?
They would know to bring that home.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to amend this motion just to remove LCMA 5 from there so that we can consider it separately. Thank you.
Is there a second for John's motion, Tom O'Connell? Any discussion on this motion? Go ahead, John.
As I mentioned, we're looking at a highly variable situation because there's so few people are actually lobstering. As Kate said, the catch actually did go up despite the closed season that was in place, but I think that's due to the local conditions and the few people that we have fishing actually just doing better this past year. As I said, I think given the situation, it's one of those things where I don't think we need to be taking such a drastic action there. Thank you.
Steve Train?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If LCMA 5 is removed, would the multiple permit holders be held to most restrictive rule as far as removing gear? Would it have to be removed from the water if they have 4 and 5, or would it be removed from 4 to 5?
Good question. Is that a question that Tom would want to address?
I couldn't tell you at this point, no.
Richie White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'd like to see the grace period defined a little more, that they can't actually fish the gear, that the gear has to be dormant, while they're, without that, I just don't see that you're gaining the potential gain that we're looking to gain.
Adam Nowalski.
Yeah, could I recognize Mr. Muffley that could provide clarification to that issue with regards to the 4 versus 5?
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brandon Muffley with New Jersey Marine Fisheries. From my understanding, the guys that have multiple, permits in both areas are going to have to declare which area they're going to fish prior to the season, and they're going to be, they cannot change during the season, so they can't move the gear from one area to the other, but they are going to be held to the more restrictive measures. So a guy with an Area 5 permit is going to be closed February, March, as it is now, and they would be held to the Area 4 closure, so they're going to be closed in May. So they're going to get a 3-month closure instead of just a 1 or a 2-month closure.
And would these be New Jersey state rules that they would be abiding by? Or is this something that NIMS would have to enact?
Those are New Jersey state rules.
Jim Gilmore, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. John, if we take this out of here, the Area 5 or whatever, is there going to be a subsequent motion to do something in Area 5? Because we got a timing issue then. So are you guys going to do something now, or if we wait until the February meeting, then so what's the plan on that? Thanks.
John, you want to speak to that?
Well, the feedback that we've gotten from the few guys we have is that if anything was done, the 10% trap reduction, which I know the TC found was not adequate, but that was the only option that was acceptable to them. So just put it that way.
Doug Grout?
So you're saying that's the only plan you'd put forward at this meeting for 5?
John?
Well, that was what I had thought coming in here was going to be the option for 4 and 5. I didn't realize that this closure option was going to be the motion. So, yeah, that was more of what was expected, was to go with the 10% reduction in gear rather than the closed season.
Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my intention to make a substitute motion for the 10% for 4 and 5. I don't know if it would be in order at this point, but that is my intention, and I will bring that forth at the point. If you want to vote this motion to amend up or down first and then go back to the original, but that's what I intend to do at this point, hearing the conversation.
Thank you, Adam. I think that's a good idea. So if we're done discussing it, can we get a vote on the motion to amend, to remove LCMA 5 from the original motion? Can I get a vote? All in favor? In favor to amend the motion to remove 5? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Nulls? Terry and Doug abstaining? Opposed, okay. I'm sorry, let's take that vote again. How many are in favor of the motion? Let's do this again. Nice and high. And you have Peter. Okay. All right. How many opposed? Nice and high. How many abstentions? Any nulls? None. Okay, so motion fails 4-6. So Adam, you want to make another motion?
Yes, I'd move to substitute a 10% reduction for LCMAs 4 and 5. And if I get a second, if I could briefly speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
John Clark seconded the motion. Tony wants to speak.
Adam, would you be in favor of clarifying a 10% reduction in what?
A 10% reduction in trap allocation. Thank you.
Right, so we have the motion, we have the second. Adam, do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, and just briefly, again, I think with what we have, we heard a lot of evidence when we originally put these reductions in place about the fishery in 4 and 5 at the time. New Jersey in particular brought forth a lot of positive evidence for the health of the resource at that time, and I think the big issue right now is with the upcoming stock assessment coming up. I understand that the 10% reduction, the technical committee has concerns about what degree of reduction that would actually result in, but I think given where we are with the resource in 4 and 5, as well as the upcoming stock assessment, it would be a prudent way forth at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Is there anyone who wants to speak in support of the motion? Bill, where are you on this? Okay, anyone else in support of the motion? All right, anyone want to speak in opposition? Oh, Tom, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, obviously I'll speak in support of the motion, just being at the LCMT meeting, and that was their preferred option.
Okay. Walter.
A question, where this is in trap allocation, is it going to have an effect on the amount of gear in the water? Or is it a paper, is there, is it going to have a 10% effect on the gear in the water, or is it going to be latent effort that's removed?
Who can answer that question? Adam, go ahead.
We did have discussion about that with our own TC member in New Jersey leading up to this meeting, and his comments at that time were that the fishermen are fishing every piece of gear they have available to them. So our understanding at that time was that it would actually have a direct impact on gear in the water based on that information that was provided to us.
Bill Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whichever one passes, when would this take place and be implemented versus when is the next stock assessment going to be released?
The next stock assessment is released in about 6 months from now, next May.
The stock assessment will be presented to the board at the May board meeting.
Right. And I would turn to Tom or Adam. When would this 10% reduction in trap allocation take effect? Go ahead, Tom.
It would be in this next fishing year of 2015.
And you would make that cut based on New Jersey state rules and the issuance of trap tags. Go ahead.
Correct.
Dave Simpson?
Yeah, I'm opposed to the motion. I'm presuming that this is in response to Addendum 17 that we were supposed to have in place 2 or 3 years ago. We talked a lot with the technical committee about any determinable, any correlation between number of traps and exploitation rate and to try to get at what kind of reduction in traps would be required to even begin to get a reduction in exploitation. And frankly, this doesn't pass a straight face test and would really cause me great distress, because we have a 3-month closed season to achieve that 10% reduction. And to Walter's point about latency, I'm not even sure this would actually result in a reduction in the number of traps in the water. Looking through the tables just briefly a few minutes ago, Connecticut apparently had 23,000 traps in the water last year. We have 235,000 traps allocated. This wouldn't do anything, and I think in terms of credibility of this board, we can't pass this.
Jim Gilmore?
Just briefly, I completely agree with Dave. I mean, this was something we couldn't quantify, so if we're going to go down this road, I think we're just really not doing anything.
Thank you. Bob tells me that the TC didn't get a chance to review the degree of latency in the statistical area. So maybe we could get that at the next meeting, you think?
Yeah, that's possible. To my knowledge, we have not seen any estimates for Area 4 or Area 5 that gives us the allocation versus an estimate of the active traps fished. And I'm assuming that would be data that they'd be able to pull from their vessel trip reports or some other reporting mechanism that to give the board a sense of what the degree of latency would be. But I would reiterate, though, that even if it were actual traps, the TC doesn't feel that a 10% reduction would equate to a reduction in catch.
All right, well, why don't we dispense with the motion here and get it behind us. So why don't we take a vote on this? So, all right, so all in favor, nice and high with the hands. Who's in favor? 3. Opposed? Abstentions? And nulls. All right, so the motion fails. In light of the lack, I think, of analysis that the TC has to come forth, is this something we should consider taking up at the February meeting to get better documentation? Oh, I'm sorry. We still have a motion on the table. I still put that to the board. Is this something that you might want to consider for the February meeting? Just think about that. Do we want to move on this particular motion at this time, though? Richie. I'm sorry, Terry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly, Maine doesn't have a dog in this fight. I do want to provide the board Maine shrimp trap removal rules, because we don't allow a 2-week grace period. We allow 5 days. And during that time period when the traps come out of the water, no product is, it's not legal to land a product. I am opposed to the 2-week grace period. I think it's a huge loophole. If we're going to use a closure, I think it needs to be a closure. I'm not opposed to the setting of the unbaited traps, but 2 weeks to me is just on principle 2 more fishing weeks, and I would not support the motion on the board for that reason.
Okay. Any other comments on the motion?
Thank you. I was going to offer an amendment that would allow the 2-week grace period for the removal of lobster traps and then let the balance of that sentence remain.
Richie White.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Craig, or do you want to speak to it?
Well, based on what I've been listening to and based on what I think I remember from the time when we put in place our closed season, this just seems like a rather short period of time, and to encumber that short period of time with some 2-week allowance seems to me that it kind of dilutes any savings that you'd get. So that was the reason for the motion.
Doug Grout.
In the current measures in other areas that involve a closed season. Is there a grace period that's allowed in the other seasonal closures, and it is 2 weeks? It's a full 2 weeks?
But it's a longer grade, but it's a long, yeah, but I believe the closure itself, Doug, is it's much longer. Yeah. Dave Simpson.
Could I just get confirmation that that 1 month period does equate to 10% of the landings for that period? Did the technical committee look at that and provide verification that that does equate to 10% of their average landings?
Bob Glenn? While Bob's looking that up, do we have any other comments on the floor on the motion?
Sorry, I just wanted to confirm. The actual percentage in that period was 9.9%, so.
Tom?
Yes, I'm looking at the table from the memo from the TC, or from Peter Clark and Kim McGowan to the TC, dated October 6, 2014. And in that table, yes, you're right, it's a 9.9% reduction for the May closure, and then the other 1%, or the other, I'm looking to see what 0.2% would be from the day in April.
Thank you. Okay, can we get a vote on the motion that's on the board now? All right, all in favor of the motion? Opposed? Abstentions? Tom abstained. And any no votes? Okay. Tom, how did you vote? No. Okay. All right, so now we have a new main motion. Yes. We have a new main motion on the board. Want me to read the motion? I'm sorry, the amendment did carry 7-1 with 1 no vote. So now a new main motion, shall I read it? Okay, all right. Any? Okay. I'll read the amended motion to move to approve a closed season from April 30th to May 31st for Lobster Conservation Management Area 4 and 5 to achieve the required 10% reduction in Addendum 17, allow the setting of unbaited traps 1 week prior to the season reopening. Motion by Mr. Baum and second by Mr. Gilmore. That's the motion. So, all in favor? Opposed? For abstentions and nulls. Motion carries 6-4. Thank you. All right. The next item on the agenda is update on the Lobster database. And there is a memo that was distributed to the board. Do you have anything on that? Kate will speak to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want the board to be aware of the updated timeline for implementation of the Lobster database and how this will impact the trap cuts moving forward. So at this point, currently all federal allocations and the testing of the database are nearing completion. It's expected late winter, early spring. States and potentially NOAA fisheries have discussed holding public hearings for active and new fishermen, as well as permit brokers and fishing industry representatives, in order to inform the stakeholders about how the state and federal program will function, and also to explain the trap allocation and trap transfer rules. For September 30th, 2015, this is the deadline for allocation transfer applications for NOAA fisheries and states. They will be accepted through the state and will be approved or denied in advance of the 2016 permit and tag orders. And it's expected for May 1st, 2016. The trap allocation cuts will be implemented for the beginning of the 2016 fishing year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions or comments? I do want to announce that at the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association annual meeting, we're going to hold a seminar on this matter and try to explain to the industry, where the development of the database is, what the application process will look like well in advance of the deadline to submit applications for trap allocation transfers of September 30th. And that'll be an open meeting. It's free to attend, so if anybody's interested in coming to the Lobstermen's Association meeting, that will be Friday the 23rd in the afternoon. Any questions or comments? Thank you. No, I think it's fairly clear, just so everybody knows, that the trap cuts will be taking place in 2016. The addendum that was passed simply identifies the cuts, the 5% cuts for Area 3 and the 6 cuts for Area 2 will be executed after the development of the database and after all vessels and fishermen are qualified. And because that process is still ongoing, it should be apparent to everyone that this is slated for 2016. I can speak to the issue of the database. It has been a real challenge. It's unprecedented to try to combine state and federal licensing databases because they're largely incompatible. The state systems permit individuals while the federal system permits vessels. And so we've been working diligently to try to make connections to that. And that's part of what we want to describe to the industry when they come out for that public meeting in January, is to explain, in their portfolio, in their records, how we as managers are trying to bridge this gap and those challenges. Any questions on that? Pete Burns, want to speak to that?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'll just jump on that sentiment right there. I think that working with the working group on the trap tag database, we've realized that there's still some more work to do. I'll just make it clear that we still have to do a final rule to implement the trap cuts, but this information from the working group on this timeline will help us to move forward with that. And we're looking back at the Commission's intent in addendum in the addenda in the plan that talk about having transferability and the trap cuts happening simultaneously. So as long as we get the database in place and our rule in place to implement the trap cuts, we can move forward in that way. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The next, David Borden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stepped out of the room for a minute, and I may have missed it. But did you say that you're going to put an article in the Commercial Fisheries News and basically describe what you're going to describe at these meetings? Is that what your intent is?
I didn't mention that, but that's certainly the right way to do this kind of outreach. I mean, our hope is to get fishermen in the room to find out why this has taken so long, and to try to explain to them how they need to go about their business decisions in this system, in terms of the deadlines, in terms of the eligibility of traps.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and particularly if it incorporates National Marine Fisheries Service staff in the writing and preparation, so it's a kind of a joint communique from both groups.
Thanks. The next issue on the agenda is the update on the trap tag vendor for 2015 and 16, and Kate has a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just if board members are not aware, due to staffing changes with the trap tag vendor, there were considerable problems with the ordering, processing, manufacturing, and delivery of the lobster trap tags for the 2014-2015 fishing year. As a result, the Commission did issue a request proposal to seek bids for a new trap tag vendor. We received 2 proposals, and the Commission and working group has decided to go forward with Cambridge Seals, which is the current vendor used by the state of Maine. So we'll be moving forward with that vendor to process the trap tags for the 2015 fishing year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions for Kate on that matter? No. Great. All right. We're into the FMP review and state compliance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief to keep us on time here. As the board is aware, landings have kind of exponentially increased in the last few years. In 2012, Maine and Massachusetts accounted for 85% and 10% of the landings from the fishery. There have been a number of recent management actions that have been taken through various addenda. In 2012, the sampling requirements are listed in Table 1 in the FMP. In 2012, all states were implementing the required dealer and harvester reporting at or above the required levels. With regard to the overall fishery-independent biological sampling, states were sampling below the FMP requirement or with reduced efforts. I'd like to point out in 2012, New York was unable to conduct multi-species port sampling due to a delay in the contract development and a reduction in IJ funds. Connecticut also had a similar issue with the reduction in funds. Additionally, federal funding for Rhode Island's sea sampling program was lost in May of 2012, but however, state funds were used to continue sampling June through the end of the year. So that is why those states have check minuses in the table. For the YOY settlement surveys, most of the surveys conducted by Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut were low or below the mean for the time series. With the ventless trap surveys, trends show mostly upward or stable trends. All states are currently in compliance with all the required measurements. 3 states have requested de minimis: Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. Virginia and Delaware met the de minimis requirement. Maryland did exceed the threshold for the first time and is currently taking steps to address this issue. This includes implementation of immediate port-side sampling, beginning a ventless survey sampling, and also seaside sampling, and for next year, a passive settlement survey. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions for Kate? Kate, do we need a motion on the de minimis? Okay. Can I get a motion to accept the FMP review and the request for de minimis status? Bill Adler? Motion by Bill, seconded by David Borden. And the de minimis states are? Why don't you speak to that?
Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware requested de minimis, but only Virginia and Delaware met the requirement for de minimis.
Okay. Any discussion on that, Tom?
Yeah, recognizing that Maryland's harvest is less than 1% of the coastal harvest, I would like to amend the motion to ask the board's consideration to include Maryland for another year.
Is there a second on that motion to amend? John Clark, thank you. Do you want to speak to it, Tom, or?
No, and I think as Kate said, we're looking for opportunities to expand our monitoring requirements beyond the de minimis criteria. Just recognizing the, how limited our fishery is, it's difficult to make that significant investment, given other priorities at this time. So we request this consideration of the board, and if we maintain above that threshold, understand the board would decide otherwise. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Tom. Doug Grout?
Just to ask the Plan Development Team Coordinator, do we have does the board have the option here as to whether we can provide the Maryland with de minimis here if they don't meet the 1% criteria? Do we have the authority within the plan to say, okay, you're at 2%, you can still be de minimis?
The question is it discretionary for the board to approve de minimis even if he exceeded the 1% threshold?
Yeah, the de minimis standard is 40,000 pounds average for the last 2 years. So it's not 1%. And, the board could take consideration if the state is working towards resolving the issue. They have had that discretion for previous de minimis requirements.
Okay. Tom?
Yeah, I had the same question with Doug, and I went back to the Addendum 1. Addendum 1, I think, is back in 1999. And it does say that there is a threshold, but the board can take into consideration advice from the technical committee and other factors to, use their discretion in this decision.
All right, Bob, would you want to comment on that from the TC perspective in terms of the need for the data collection in the state of Maryland?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The technical committee hasn't had an opportunity to really to review that information, so I can't speak on behalf of them. I think it largely depends on how the board feels of what the de minimis criteria are, and if that's sufficient. I don't know if that's necessarily a decision or a recommendation for the TC to make.
All right, well, ready to take a motion? Oh, we got Doug Grout.
Just a clarification. I mean, you said that the standard is 40,000 pounds on an average over several years, over 2 years, but the plan review team saying they're not meeting the de minimis standard, so their landings over 2 years have exceeded 40,000 pounds. But we still have the discretion, even if they exceed this over 2 years, to give them an exemption, according to the FMP.
Yes, they have exceeded it for the average of 2 years and are currently taking steps to come into compliance with the requirements.
Dave Simpson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I'm looking at Table 1 that has the landings by state over the last 30 years. And so I don't know what the last 2 years are, because 2012 is the most recent year, and that's shown as confidential. So I'm guessing it's pretty low. 2011 was 40,090 pounds. 2010 was 30,000. And then you have to go back to 1987 before you see a number in excess of 40,000 pounds. So unless they had a big jump, they must be awful close if they're over at all. So it's right on the bubble.
Okay. All right. Well, let's take a vote on the motion. All in favor to include Maryland as de minimis? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Peter Burns? And any nulls? So it passes 9-0 to 1. And now on the main motion to accept the FMP review for 2014 and the de minimis requests now for Virginia, Delaware, and Maryland. All in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions? Nulls? Passes unanimously. All right, we're on to other business, and I think Terry wanted to talk about codfish and lobster traps.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief. I just wanted to update the board that a recent operational assessment concluded the Gulf of Maine cod is overfished and overfishing is occurring. Consequently, last week the SSC met and reduced the ABC from 1,550 metric tons to 386. There are two back-to-back years of 70-something% reductions. The New England Council scrambling to develop measures to reduce the mortality of cod in 2015 and requested that the agency implement emergency action for measures in the balance of 2014. Of particular interest to this board is a motion from the Groundfish Committee that requested the Science Center review and summarize all existing information on the patterns, extent, and mortality associated with cod bycatch in the lobster fishery in the Gulf of Maine, state and federal waters, and estimate current cod removals to inform potential management measures and upcoming actions. So I don't know what next steps are going to be. I just thought it was prudent to give the board a heads up.
Thank you, Terry. Doug?
Just to follow up on that, one of the measures that is being contemplated in Framework 53 is to have extensive closures from northern Massachusetts into southern Maine on a seasonal basis all the way out to Jeffrey's Ledge that would remove all gear capable of catching groundfish. Currently, lobster traps are not included in there, but clearly if the Science Center's evaluation of this considered lobster traps as a gear capable of catching groundfish, it would have a substantial impact on the lobster fishery in the Gulf of Maine.
Thank you, Doug. David?
Yeah, I've heard of this issue from, in sort of other circles and a great deal of concern about it. And I'm wondering if, folks from Maine and New Hampshire or Massachusetts have an idea what the fate of these cod are. Are they being turned around and used as bait immediately? Are they being landed? I've heard, I have similar concerns with black sea bass where short black sea bass are immediately being, spiked into the lobster traps and used as bait, which is not a very, wouldn't consider that the highest and best use of a $4 a pound fish.
I think, Bill Adler, do you want to comment?
From my experience, occasionally you will catch a cod in a lobster trap. You have to fight with it to get it out of the trap, and then you throw it over and it's gone. And chances are they, in most cases, they wouldn't meet the minimum size to be able to take anyway. They'd be too small because they can't get into the trap. This isn't universal. I mean, there are probably other cases, but in my experience in lobstering for 40 years, it has not been a big deal.
Right. Terry?
Yeah, in answer to Dave's question, we've had a number of inquiries, and Pat's tasked staff to start data mining the Maine sea sampling data, both spatially and temporally. So that's an ongoing project right now. We hope to have the information available soon.
All right, Terry, thanks for bringing that up, and Doug as well. Is there any other business to come before the board today? Yes, Doug? Yep, Doug. I'm John, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry for being so late with this, but I'd like to make a motion to take no action on the recently approved management measures for LCMA 4 and 5 until after the completion of the stock assessment. Thank you.
Is there a second on that motion? Tom O'Connell? David? Well, actually, I should come back to you to justify that.
I think the numbers we have for, especially for LCMA 5 being as minuscule as they are to the whole coastwide catch, if we could just wait until after we get the results in from the stock assessment, it might give us a better idea. We've had evidence from 4 and 5 that the stock is very healthy there, and if we could just wait, as I said, before we implement this. Thank you.
David Simpson.
Yeah, I'd just say we haven't approved Addendum 17 that requires every jurisdiction to reduce their harvest by 10%. Any change, no matter how small their fishery is, it's not fair to the states that have taken that action. It's been a burden on our fishermen. In some circles, not very popular. And I think we simply have to do it. It's the next assessment may bring a different story, and we'll look forward to that. But for 2 years now, this needs to be in place.
Okay. Anyone else? Tom?
Yeah, I know this is a difficult situation, and I think that as we saw yesterday with eels, there have been situations where states take a different level of reduction, and, this is a request to, look at what the potential benefits of achieving a 10% reduction would be, and, the economics of our communities, and trying to buy some time to look at what the next stock assessment says. So, we'd ask consideration for this. Thanks.
Okay. Any other comments? All right, let's vote this up or down. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? And null votes? Maine has a null vote. All right, motion fails 3-6. Any other business to come before the board today? If not, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much for your attendance.